Bonjour, good afternoon. Je suis désolé, mais je ne parle pas peu de français, so the rest is in English. So hello, my name is Simon Phipps. I've been attending this conference and the conferences that came before it since it was on Avenue Georges V at Eurosites. So I think that is like 15 years. I even came in the year of Bataclan. So I've tried to come to every single conference. So I may have seen you here before, in which case, hello. Now, I am absolutely not an expert in AI like your previous speaker, but I am just as skeptical. I have studied computer science, and I studied a book a long time ago called Society of Mind, which talked about how human thought happens and hypothesized whether artificial intelligence is possible. And I have believed since the 80s that artificial intelligence is not possible. So I believe in what is called weak AI. And as a consequence, I believe that what an AI is an application which is using a statistical model to perform an analysis on the statistical model in response to a query. The one that fascinates everybody is generative AI. And that is a piece of software which studies a statistical model and tries to persuade you that it is giving you the answer you wanted. So I was watching Luke previously talking about errors and hallucinations. I want to make it very clear, an AI must be assumed to never tell you the truth, because it is not there to tell you the truth. It is there to persuade you that it has delivered the correct response to your query. And it will do whatever it takes to persuade you. And if sometimes that accidentally involves telling you the truth, so be it. But AIs do not tell you the truth. They are a tool that performs a task. And that is why this subject is very important to me. Not because I want to have the law written by a computer, not because I want to have my doctor replaced by a robot, not because I want to have the civil service replaced by a web application, which unfortunately seems to be what our governments in France and England and in the USA all want to do. No, I believe it is an important tool to help people with what they want to do. And it's a tool that can go wrong. So this was a case in the New York Times about an AI application being used to check for child sexual abuse materials, CSAM, as it is called in English, and it has a similar name in Europe. There is a very misguided piece of law that is going through the European Parliament at the moment about using tools like this to identify CSAM. And the AI got it wrong. And this was very motivating for us at OSI, because we think this is a problem, and we have long understood that this is the sort of problem that you use free software and open source to solve. Because what you do is you try to find the bug that produced the error. And the question then arises of, well, what does it take to fix a buggy AI? Now, I just have to step aside for a moment and say, I don't believe that when that AI misidentified the photographs that it was a bug. I believe that the AI was doing exactly what was expected, which was to persuade you that it had found some CSAM. And it did an excellent job, which is why the father involved in the case was pursued by the police, because it was a very persuasive example that it produced. And in that particular case, the bug was not the AI, the bug was the law. because the law believed the AI was telling the truth. But there are many cases where we want to make an AI do a better job. So how do we do that? Well, we have an old saying in the open source community that many eyes make all bugs shallow. Now, unfortunately, that isn't true. Many eyes make all bugs seen, but they're not necessarily identified as bugs unless somebody with enough expertise is one of the people doing the seeing. But nonetheless, it's a good starting point. Maybe that's what we need with AI. Maybe we need many eyes seeing the code. Or maybe we need something else. Maybe we need to be able to take the code apart and change what it does. Well, that is probably closer to what we want to be able to do with an AI. We probably want to be able to take it apart, understand how it works, and put it back together doing a different thing. So we realized when we looked at the nature of AI that the open source definition and the free software definition don't help us to know whether we have the freedoms to make the AI do the thing we want it to do. Because at its heart, that is what an open source or a free software AI would be. It would be one that we could take and make it do the thing we want rather than the thing that they want. So we decided several years ago to start understanding what an AI was, understanding how to make it open source. And we actually started in 2022 on a process of trying to make a definition of open source AI. Our objective was to reach a shared understanding and a consensus in as much of the open source and free software community as we could. So we started by talking to a range of organizations, not just advocacy organizations, but also organizations like Wikimedia, like École Polytechnique, like the EFF in the USA, like the Internet Archive, like Mozilla, to ask them what they thought would qualify as an open source AI. And as we took that process forward, we realized that it was going to become more and more important because AI was behaving very much like a bubble, a technology bubble. We've seen technology bubbles before. We are all old enough to have seen the last bubble, the crypto bubble. Many of us have seen the bubbles that came before. Each of them was a buzzword associated with a technology that seemed to fit the buzzword. And in each case, there were two things happened. One of them was a moral panic, and the other thing that happened was a legislative panic. And exactly the same thing started happening on open source AI. Personally, I would prefer to talk about machine learning because it does not have the implication of the term artificial intelligence that makes you jump to the wrong conclusions about what it is there for. But unfortunately, we discovered that people started calling their AIs open. In fact, one company even stole the word from the community and called their company OpenAI, despite the fact that their product is absolutely not. And so we felt we had to act, because if not OSI, who would define the term open source AI in a way that actually consulted with the global community rather than served a single set of stakeholders? OSI is a public charity. We are not in the pocket of any particular big tech. We are also not under the control of any large lobby group or of any large intellectual movement. We exist solely to continue to defend the term open source and to continue to identify the licenses that qualify as open source software licenses. So we felt that the time was right, and that became even more urgent when we saw that the European Commission had given an exception to the AI Act to open source AI. Now, they didn't define what open source AI meant. And so we discovered that the sky darkened with lobbyists from Meta who all wanted to persuade every politician in Brussels that Llama is open source. And that they carry on with that. For the avoidance of any doubt, while Llama is freely distributable in many cases, it is absolutely not open source or free software. And that is just by using old-fashioned definitions. The open source definition, section 6, says there can be no restriction on the field of endeavor for the licensing of a piece of software if it is going to be open source. And Meta restricts both the field of use. It says you cannot use Llama to train another AI. And we might come on to why that's really important in a moment. And they say that there is a limit to the number of users that you can have before you have to negotiate a new license with Meta. So you can't just use Llama to innovate. You can only use Llama to innovate freely if you're unsuccessful. If you're successful, they would like to have some money, please. So we felt the time was right, that we had to protect this frontier and make sure that the term open source was used as a term of art in a way that we all recognize and that hopefully we could at least assent to, if not agree with vigorously. So what have we discovered and what can you do? So we've discovered 4 things. The first thing that we have discovered is that we have to define open source AI as a term on its own. We can't just define machine learning. And we can start with the definition that the OECD has created, where they say, as you see on the screen, that it's a machine-based system that infers from the input that it receives how to generate outputs, such as predictions, content recommendations, or decisions that can influence physical or virtual environments. And then they importantly note that AI systems vary in their levels of autonomy and their levels of adaptiveness to new circumstances after they've been deployed. So it's a very broad definition, and most people we've spoken to over the last 2 years are happy to use that definition to put the bounding box around what we are going to discuss. Then we've looked at what are the building blocks of AI. So everyone we talked to talked about 3 things when they were talking about AI. They talked about the hardware that was going to be required and also the electricity that was going to be needed to run that hardware. They talked about the knowledge that was needed to build the statistical model that lay at the heart of AI. And they talked about the data that was necessary to convey that knowledge. And we tried to understand what the impact of those 3 things were going to be. And we could see that the biggest problem was going to be the data, because the hardware just costs money. You buy it from somebody who makes hardware. The knowledge involves your time to extract the knowledge from experience or from data. But the data, well, the data is tied up in a gazillion laws that are all different in every country. It is profoundly difficult to create a uniform surface of whether data can be used. With software, it was relatively easy because the Berne Convention created a uniform copyright regime in every country in the world. And although copyright laws vary country by country, they don't vary so much that your open source license from France is inapplicable in England, or that your open source license in Japan is inapplicable in Brazil, because all of those countries are Berne Convention signatories, and so their copyright laws have at least equivalent concepts in them. But data laws are different. Data laws often embody not only copyright, but other rights, a database right in some countries, a compilation right. They sometimes embody, express human rights, the personal right of personal information. And so disentangling data turns out to be amazingly difficult. And secondly, data is absolutely huge. The models that are used to train AIs are unbelievably expensive to manipulate because they are massive. So the data set used by Eleuther AI for their LLM, their large language model, which is called the Pile, is 825 gigabits or gigabytes of data. The whole of Wikipedia is only 43 gigabytes. So the data set that Eleuther is having to manipulate and then digest is absolutely enormous. It's derived from many sources. It is a very uneven legal surface. Resolving whether you have permission to use it is very difficult. So data is the problem. This is not as simple as the software of the 70s, where we simply use the Berne Convention to our convenience. This is more tricky. So the second thing that we learned is that getting to a conclusion is actually very complicated. What we did with open source was over a period of a very extended period. It was 15 years of life of the Free Software Foundation, and then about a decade of the Debian project, and then about 5 years of the Open Source Initiative. We gathered the answers to questions about the legal framework underlying software and the principles that need to be expressed in the definition, and then how licenses were built to express those ethical bases. And that took us maybe 30 years of history compressed over the course of 15 years of experience, expressed into a definition over 5 years of argument. Now, this time round, we don't have the luxury. People have started using the term open source AI already. There is already an exception in European law that allows open source AI to be exempt from regulation. If you can convince the regulators that your proprietary closed AI is actually open source, maybe because you have open in the name of your company, or maybe because you sent 1 million lobbyists to Brussels, then you can be special. You can overcome other activity. Third thing we learned that we had to start with a principle, that you can't start from the bottom of the problem where the answer is. You have to start from the top of the problem where the principles are. And we tried to work out how to sum up the golden rule behind free software and open source in a way that didn't use any of our words or their words. And so here it is. We think that software has got a golden rule behind it. That golden rule says that if I like a piece of software, I must be free to share it with other people. I think that's the summary of the law and the prophets. I don't know who the law and the prophets are in this case, but that is the golden rule. If I like a piece of software, I must be able to share it with other people. And so surely that's what we would say about AI. If I like an AI, I must be able to share it with other people. So what does that mean? Well, we took the 4 freedoms that Richard Stallman wrote, and we tried to rewrite them so that they fit AI. And there they are. We think that to be open source, an AI system has to be available under legal terms that grant the freedoms to use the system for any purpose and without having to ask for permission from anybody, to study how the system works and inspect its component parts, to modify the system to change its recommendations, predictions, or decisions so that they suit your needs rather than the originators, and to share the system with or without modifications for any purpose. And that is pretty much what the open source AI definition says. Now, while we were working on that, we discovered there was a problem. You see, when it comes to open source software, we understand what it is you have to make open. In the GPL talks about making available the preferred form to make modifications to the software system. So when you receive a piece of software under the GNU General Public License, that piece of software you've received must come with an offer to also have all of the source code that was used to make that system in the preferred form that programmers need for making modifications. That's easy, because I prefer to have it in source code. You may prefer it in binary, I don't know, but I like it in source code, and so that's what I expect to be available. But for an AI, what do we mean? What is the preferred form to make modifications to an AI system? Now I think that turns out to be the hardest question. So number 4. We decided that was the question that we needed to double down on and go and define. And so we created a co-design process that worked all over the world to define what the preferred form for modification for open source software meant. We ran in-person workshops in South America, North America, Africa, Europe, and Asia. We somehow missed Antarctica, so I apologize for that. We had participants present in those meetings virtually from 35 countries. We ran multiple instances of the workshops. We ran different workshops for different communities of contributor. So just as it happened for the GNU General Public License version 3, where there was a workshop for corporations who didn't want to have other people listening to their complaints, we ran some closed groups so that businesses could tell us privately what was right or what was wrong or what they needed. And then when we'd had all of that input from groups like you, input from academic seminars, input from closed discussions with companies, input from the internet, we synthesized a definition. We synthesized something that described what the preferred form was. So this is the process that we followed. We went through those first 2 arrows took around about a year, and then from validation onwards took about a second year. And we produced multiple versions. We used a co-authoring system called HackMD to do co-authoring and commenting. I've actually just commissioned a new version of LibreOffice to do the job that does, because HackMD turned out not to be fully open source. And well, we came up with a definition. If you go view the open source AI definition today, you will see it says that it is version 1.0, and you should take comfort from that we do intend that there should be subsequent versions. We expect those subsequent versions to be very much the same at the top, where the fairly definite things are located, and we expect there to be a modest amount of change in defining the preferred form, because we still haven't really got a global consensus on what the preferred form for modifying an AI is. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. So that definition is up on our website. There is going to be a moratorium on changing it for at least the next 6 months while we let just the dust settle, partly because you need time to reflect on something that is so complicated, and partly because we're exhausted and there's only 5 of us. So I'm not going to actually take a holiday, but I should tell you my role in this is to be the staff skeptic. So I'm the one that said, there's no such thing as an AI, like Julia did just now. I said, well, you can't make all the source available. You can't make all the data available. All the data has got to be available, I said. And so I played that role. You can play that role too. Actually, we're fairly well off for people playing that role. And we would actually like more people who are going to play the role of fixing the problems rather than telling us that they're there. So if you can help with that, you'd be very welcome indeed. So what is the open source AI definition? Well, it is the four freedoms. And we say that you have got to have the freedom to use, study, modify, and share what it takes to make the AI. So that is the code, the source code used to train the system, and the source code used to create the data set, and the source code that interprets the system. And we expect that source code to be freely available under an OSI-approved license. Secondly, the model weights and parameters. We expect the model weights and parameters to be fully and freely made available without any field of use restrictions, without any acceptable use policies, because those come in a separate, those come separately. And finally, the data. Now, the data is the biggest problem because, well, we really want there to be open source medical AI. We believe that one of the critical uses of future AI systems will be to assist medical staff in rapidly diagnosing and dealing with medical issues. Not delegating the issue out, not telling the robot that it deals with the patient, but rather giving the doctor a tool that will very rapidly do the analysis that would take the doctor a great deal of time. And if that's going to happen, then we need models that are trained on patient data. And I can absolutely guarantee you that if I trained the model with patient data, I can't share it with you. The patient data is simply not available, and I am very happy the patient data is not available. I do not want any of my medical history ending up in Google. I do not want a group of people using my medical data, without my permission anyway, to train a future AI. So how do we have an open source AI? Well, it turns out, let's come back to that. Let's go back to there. It turns out that you don't need all the data to train an AI. You just need the right data. And I conceptualize an AI as a data compression tool. So it's a little bit like taking a photograph with your camera. Your camera takes the photograph and you have many, many, many pixels, and the JPEG algorithm then throws away 80% of them and just takes a statistical analysis of the pixels that it threw away, together with using a certain number of the pixels in the JPEG file. Now, it's not exactly the same for an AI, but for an AI, we have discovered that it doesn't need all the data. It just needs some of the data. And the trick is knowing which data. And so if you don't know which data, then you need all of it. And if you do have know a way for training an AI without all the data, then it's okay to use that, as long as it gives me the preferred form for modifying the AI so that it can be twisted and bent to the purpose for which I want to achieve with it. So we have left open the possibility that there can be AI systems that do not contain all of the data. But if you have the data and you can legally share it, then under the open source AI definition, you must do so. If you don't have all the data because it was transient or because it's legally restricted, then you must share sufficient information to allow an expert to recreate the model using the data that they have, possibly with synthetic data, that's with data that's created by the AI model for training another AI, the thing that Llama tells you is forbidden, by the way. So we've left that door open. Now, that has led to some dispute. There are, however, already a number of AI systems that meet the definition. So there's a list of them on the side there. They're coming from Allen Institute, eLuther, LLM360, and some other organizations who actually will probably change their agreements to match the open source AI definition. Unfortunately, the major commercial AI systems do not meet the open source AI definition. We've had a fair number of criticisms of what we're doing, which is not surprising because we're doing something complicated and very fast. Some people say we should not call it open source AI. That's the wrong term. We should call it something else. And I agree. I wish we hadn't had to call it the open source AI definition, but we had to respond to the market. We had to defend the term open source in the global marketplace of ideas and products, and we had to defend it in the legislative environments. People say OSI stretched its mission to do this, and it was none of our business. I disagree, and I don't want to discuss it, because I don't think there's anything to discuss. I don't think there's any other organization who would have defined open source AI. There's some other organizations who would have defined something else that was similar, but open source AI, I think only OSI was going to do that. And some people said the process was unfair. I've looked at the cases that are involved there. I think they were cases where somebody had expectations of being allowed to continue being involved in the private corporate meetings after they had left their job at the private corporations. So I'm not sure that I agree with that one either. But I do have a lot of sympathy with the wrong term. I think it would have been much better to have called it an open machine learning definition, if only we had stopped OpenAI and the European Commission from using the term. And then people say open data must be required. And I think this is the open question. I have a lot of sympathy with the view that an AI can only be open if every bit of data used to train it is supplied. I also have a lot of sympathy with the view that that's impossible to achieve for certain classes of applications. And I've been told by experts, and I wish Luke Julia was still here, that you don't necessarily need all the data. You only need so much of the data. And I would love to have seen that in the definition. We've also had some other complaints. We've had a lot of complaints from corporations who say that our definition is too restrictive. Why did we not bend our principles to allow Llama to count as open source? IBM very much dislikes our definition. Amazon dislikes our definition enough to have withdrawn sponsorship from us. If you hear people saying that our definition is too lax and we are serving our corporate masters, that's false too. We're in that wonderful position. You know that you're right when you're doing something difficult if everybody hates you. And that's the position that I find that we are in at the moment. I think we have it just about right at this stage, with plenty of room for improvement in the future. We've seen other people trying to do the same definitional job, and we have found that the Free Software Foundation and Software Freedom Conservancy have pretty much come to the same conclusion as us, and have pretty much been left in the same place of saying that there is more work to do to answer the difficult questions of what represents the preferred form for modification. On the other hand, a lot of organizations think that we're in pretty much the right place, and that's very gratifying. Some of those organizations did a lot of soul searching before endorsing the definition. There's quite a few more on our website. This slide is a month or so old. If you go to opensource.org/AI/endorsements, there's some more there. We would love to have your organizational endorsement, but we would much more love to have your organizational engagement, because we recognize that this is going to be a process that we're on. This is a journey that we have started, that version 1.0 is not the final version. I note that the free software definition, when it was created, it was 10 years before Freedom Zero was added to it. I note that for the open source definition, that it was 5 years before clause 10 of the open source definition was added. And so I see no reason why the open source AI definition should be final in the year of publication. I think it will change, and the change that it needs is the change that you are going to contribute. So do please join us in the process of working on the future. We'd love you to endorse version 1. We would love you to spread the word in your circles. We would love you to watch the opensource.org website for when we open the comment process. And we would also love you to tell everybody that says that Llama is open source that no, it's not. They could change that if they wanted to, because they're very close to being open source. I don't believe in gradients of open, by the way. I don't think something is almost open. I think they've almost got it out of being closed. They just need to make 1 or 2 small changes, which they are very free to make. So I'd also like to invite you, because it pays my salary, to become a member of OSI, but I will still talk to you even if you don't. And I invite you to send me your questions via email, because I suspect that I'm out of time. Very, very much so. So thank you very much for your attention.